welcome to the Basics of Life. My name's Ken Burkey, and we found John Loera in the building, and so, hey, thanks for being with us, John.
Glad to be here.
How are you doing?
Great.
How's life?
Life is good.
Good.
Good pace.
Good? Yeah,
Good
really?
pace, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. Good.
It's always good when your pace is
right.
kind of manageable. So.
Right. So you've kind of thrown the topic out, but I'm going to talk a little bit too on this one. So, wanted to talk about, just want to talk about the biggest problem in the world. We're going to talk about the biggest problem in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, which is, what do you think?
Eating too many calories?
Yeah.
Junk food?
There's a lot of problems in the world. There's a lot of problems in the world.
War?
War. Yeah. There's all types of things. But I asked this question, and it's a rhetorical question because you know the answer. But really, it all comes down to the biggest problem in the universe really is disconnection.
Yeah.
Because when we're disconnected from our Creator and we're disconnected from one another, all those other things happen. Bad things.
Yeah.
War, hatred, racism, sex trafficking, murder, all of those things are a result of being disconnected.
And we're really created to be connected.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest problem in the sense of when we are disconnected, we just do bad things. We physically are affected by it. Emotionally, we're affected by it. You see the breakdown of community. You see the breakdown of our world. Because originally, God created man and woman. They were connected to God.
Right.
And then sin entered into the garden. And what it did, when they got disconnected from God, that's when
everything fell apart.
Right. Right. So it's interesting that we tend to look at the symptoms of our world. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem.
Right.
But if we work on really having better connections with God and with one another, it begins to solve
a lot of those problems. Sometimes we put the cart before the horse, and we find that we're looking at dealing with the symptoms, but really at the root of it is this disconnection in our relationships.
Because until that connection begins to happen, we'll try to fill that void with all types of things. Because we're made to connect, we will connect to something.
Yep.
And it will not be healthy.
Yeah. So what does that look like when you look at being disconnected, and how you actually, how does somebody assess that in their own life to say, am I disconnected, or how do I get connected? You know?
Well, it's interesting. We've been talking about it a lot lately, about these four corners, the four corners of where your relational world is.
I thought you said the four corners, the four states, or
no, not the four states. But you can find yourself. You want to be in corner number 4, which I'll get to.
Okay.
But the first corner where many people find themselves is the corner of isolation. We just disconnected. It's interesting that people can be very disconnected and very isolated and be around a lot of people.
Yeah.
So loneliness and isolation can happen in cities. It can happen in a family where you're surrounded by people. It can happen with people who look like they're very successful on the outside or are successful on the outside.
Right.
But leaders can get this way. You can be isolated. Yeah. Sometimes we become isolated because we've done bad things, dumb things. So we kind
of move away and kind of stay to ourselves.
Right. Or we've been ostracized because of that.
Right.
Or a lot of times people have hurt us.
Yeah.
And when we've been hurt, we isolate. Like, well, why would I want to be connected when I've been hurt? So I'll just get isolation. And I'll ask you this question. I mean, nothing good happens in isolation.
No. I think that in my own life, I mean, one of the most difficult times in my own life is when you're alone, because your decision making and everything is done on yourself. And I have everything's on me, and I have a great ability to make the wrong decision sometimes. It's funny when you're thinking so often, when you're isolated, about what decisions you're making without perspective on the outside. Sometimes it might seem good,
right?
But ultimately, I find after the fact that some of the worst choices I've made were made because I was isolated at the time I was doing that.
Yeah, well, you see, isolation. I mean, it's the way it's when you watch a National Geographic show and you see what does the lion
Yeah.
do? He waits for the water buffalo,
Like,
the isolated one, the one that's
Right.
away from the pack.
Right.
And that happens as humans.
More
I
time
mean,
than not.
Solomon, who had the gift of wisdom, wrote, two are better than one.
Yeah.
A three
Yeah.
stranded cord is, can't
Even
be
stronger.
broken. So
Yeah.
the wisdom in that, because we were made to be in community, healthy. When people get isolated, that's where we just make, like you said, really bad decisions. Or we become victims.
Or we become victims. The other thing is when we're going through tough times, when you're trying to overcome something alone, there's more propensity to fail during that time than when you have others
Yeah.
encouraging you.
Yeah.
I heard that, people don't fail because their circumstances are insurmountable. They do it because they think they're alone in it,
Right.
that they can't do it. And that's a very, very powerful place in the negative side to be when
Yeah.
you are isolated.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I've told the story over and over about, I got lost alone on the subway in Paris, and I didn't know the language, and it was amazing how quickly fear
Starts to
just
Yeah.
began to control
Yeah.
me. I was lost. I couldn't find, and it was quickly how I was already planning my funeral. I'm going to die of starvation
on the subway.
on the subway in Paris.
Okay.
Because fear does that. But if
Yeah.
I would have been with you,
Yeah.
we would have said, hey, we're lost, but we're lost together.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out.
Right.
You had that support.
Right.
And sadly, in our culture, maybe technology helps in some ways, but it also hurts. There's just a lot of isolation with the elderly.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people who are alone.
Right.
And that there brings depression. It can bring all types of things.
It's interesting. This is a big one because you were saying. I think you were saying about some of the the most populated cities are some where you'll find some of the most isolated people.
Right.
And it's just this busyness in our own lives. Sometimes we get into this place where we really don't invest in anything outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we can even find ourselves isolated, without even realizing it until it kind of goes down that path.
Yeah, and our culture perpetuates it by being a self-made man.
Right.
Especially men can struggle
Right.
with this
Right.
more of,
Right.
and again, it goes back to maybe we've been hurt.
Yeah.
Maybe we've made some bad decisions, and so now we find ourselves isolated. There's a second corner. That's the first corner.
Yeah.
The second corner is the corner of bad connections, and we've all had those. These are connections with people who make you feel bad. They make you
Right.
feel worse. They compare. They're always comparing you with others, and because we're in that corner, that's why sometimes we run back to corner number one.
Right.
Is why do I want bad connections?
Right.
I'll just go back and isolate, or it drives us to the third corner, which is the corner of fake good connections or pseudo connections, which is these are connections that make us feel good temporarily. These
Right.
are like addictions.
Right.
These are like things that we just are masking that hurt from bad connections, or it's masking this isolation. So that's corner number three, where we're just doing things that temporarily make us feel good, numb the pain, but they don't lead to anything that's good in the long run.
It's interesting that when we operate in those two corners that actually are outside of isolation, that are either bad connections or pseudo connections that are really unhealthy underneath or temporary. This lack of healthy connections kind of drives us, so many people, to that, because a lot of times when you don't have healthy connections, those really are your relationships. You know? But it's amazing on the bad connection side, like on being around like negative people, for example, how influential that is
Right.
in our own lives.
Yeah.
It's amazing if that's all you're around,
Right.
how actually how it does impact us.
Yeah, and some people get stuck in, so you got the isolation corner number one, the bad connection corner two, you have the third corner, which is the masking, the pseudo, feel good because I got bad connections. But some people get stuck in corner number two, bad connections, and then that's how you learn, and then that becomes the way you navigate relationships in destructive ways.
Right.
And I say the three corners are what movies are made out of. This is our culture. Our culture, we bounce back from isolation, bad connections, to masking the pain, and
Temporary,
back to, and it's what movies, it's what reality shows, and it's what country western songs are made out of. I'm alone, and then I meet a girl, and she breaks my heart, so I go and drink.
My truck.
It steals my truck, so I drink.
Kicks my dog.
And then I get,
and
then I get thrown in jail, and I'm alone, and then I meet another. So those are the three corners that, left on our own, kind of mankind lives in.
It's interesting to me because it really also sheds light on when you're working with somebody who's been in an unhealthy relationship, and from the outside looking in, it's easy to go, well, why don't you just get out of that relationship?
Yeah.
Why don't, how do you stay in a difficult relationship, even one that could even be abusive? But
Yeah.
that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because when you come from a place of staying in those three corners, especially
Right.
when you don't have the healthy relationships,
Yeah.
it's powerful because, again, we're disconnected, but we have a desire to be connected.
That's the key point. The key
Yeah.
point is if we don't learn how to have healthy connections,
Yeah.
we will have unhealthy connections.
Yeah.
And we bounce back in those three corners:
Yeah.
isolation, bad connections, and then again we'll mask the pain and all
Yeah.
that. So we said at the beginning of the show we want to get to corner number 4, which
Yeah.
is healthy connections, and there's two types of healthy connections. It's having a healthy connection with God,
Yeah.
and then having a healthy connection. And you don't have to have a healthy connection with 100 people.
No.
You need a few people in your life that are for you. And I'll get to the God part in a second,
Yeah.
but we call them MVPs. You need people in your life, and you don't need a ton of them. You just
Right.
need a few people who will motivate your character, who will value your soul, and who will praise your journey. That we call them the MVPs.
That's great. I like that.
You got to have someone who's going to motivate you
Yeah.
to be all that you can be. And I know that's a cheesy term, but they care more about, they want what they're not going to allow you to compromise.
Right.
If
Right.
they see you in isolation, they'll call you on it.
Yeah.
If they see you masking pain,
Right.
they'll help you. They're going to grow your character. They're
Yeah.
going to motivate you to be all that God created you to be.
And some of that is accountability. And it's also
Absolutely.
telling you not what you want to hear all the time, but
Right.
what you need to hear sometimes.
Right.
But in the right way, in the sense that says, I care enough about you that I need to tell you some truth right now.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Well, and that's why it's an MVP. That they value your soul.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
people who value you because of what you can do for them.
Yeah.
You produce a lot of work, or
Right.
whatever it is. But if someone truly values you for who you are, not for what you can do for them,
Yeah.
then it's easier for them to motivate your character because
Yeah.
you're going to listen to them.
Yeah.
And then the P is praise your journey. To really just be a cheerleader. We need cheerleaders. We live in a negative world. You get beat up. We just need MVPs.
I love that because, and again, it is so true that you're not going to have 100 of these people.
No.
Because these are pretty deep relationships in reality.
Yeah.
Somebody that really knows you for who you are.
Right.
And, for somebody to have credibility to say, I do want to call you on your stuff at times.
Yeah.
I do value the deepest level of who you are.
Yeah.
I also love the the praising your journey part of it, because so often when we live in this world where we struggle, and it's like, again, going back to this thing of people don't fail because things are insurmountable. Sometimes they feel like they're alone. And
Right.
these reminders.
Yeah.
There's a great quote, and let's see if I can get this right, going back to the praising the journey. It's, a friend is someone who knows the song in your heart and can sing it back to you when you forget the words.
Wow.
And I love that because it's reminding you,
Right. Right.
you can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going through a tough time, but I know who you are.
Boy, and that is so rare in our culture to have
It
that
is.
kind of friendship. So the point there is to have MVPs in your life, you have to prioritize that that's important.
Yeah.
You have to invest. It's not
Right.
It's not join a group and hey, here's some MVPs for you.
Right.
It takes, investing in friendships.
And it takes some trust.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and that happens over time.
Yeah.
I think we have to, in so many ways, we have to do an assessment in our lives and go, because it begs the question, how do you develop those relationships?
Yeah.
I mean, for some of us, we have them right in front of us, and it is just the time to invest in them.
Right.
Don't take them for granted.
Right.
But there are some, maybe somebody who doesn't have healthy relationships in your life, and it's like you do have to put yourself out there in certain healthy venues.
Right. Yeah.
You just have to be careful,
And that's our bias at Green Valley is, just you got to do life in community.
You do.
And in that
Yeah.
journey, you will find those MVPs. Maybe you join a small group or
Right.
you serve together
Right.
and you go on a missions trip and all of a sudden, you make a connection.
Right.
It's not this programmed, sign up and we'll assign you an MVP.
Right. Here's your MVP.
That's more of a mentor or a counselor, but it's a little bit, you have to navigate this and really commit to it for the long run.
Right. And again, you have to be open to it.
Yeah. So corner 4 is really where, those MVPs, and then ultimately it's that corner is where you get connected to God.
Right.
Jesus said that he was the vine, we're branches, and that apart, when we're disconnected, we can't do anything.
Right.
But when we're connected, we can do everything God's created us to be. So it's really a priority. Corner number 4 is that priority to stay connected to God.
Yeah.
And that's a lifetime journey.
Yeah.
It's a daily decision.
Yeah.
To stay connected to his wisdom, to that relationship. That's why Jesus came, not for religion, but for this relationship. And then this term, it can sound churchy, but this term, the body of Christ, that's what the church is called, the body of Christ. Well, we're to live out what Christ has called us to do with one another, to love, to serve. So,
I love that.
Even in our culture, even in the faith world, it's this independent spirit. Oh, it's just me and God. I don't need people. Well, no. God created you to need God, and then you need God with skin on, so to speak.
Yeah, and to be in the community.
And that's why going to church doesn't save us.
No.
But it makes the life that Jesus said abundant a reality.
Yeah.
It's in those relationships with God and with one another, and that's corner number 4. Now, the key here is isolation is from the enemy. It's not. God does not want us isolated. We can't avoid all bad relationships.
No.
We can't. Corner number 2, bad connections. The joke is you can't go to your boss tomorrow and go, "Hey, you're a bad connection," and so I'm out of here. But
you probably would be out of here.
You would be.
Not by your choice.
But if you have some MVPs in your life, they help you navigate some of those bad connections that you might just have to live with, and they'll help you also avoid those pseudo things.
And I love going back to your connection with God too, because I think that is really where, when we are connected there, that's where we have that healthiness and strength to actually be able to filter things in the right way in those how to deal with those bad connections.
Right.
Even the ones that we have in our lives, but also to make the most of our healthy connections.
Right.
When that connection with God is there first and foremost, it actually makes our relationship so much better.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it really helps us not to isolate, to have that power to not isolate.
Yeah, well, and when I'm close to God, I'm a much better MVP to others because when I'm close to God, if closer I'm to God, there should be some humility and some a sense of service and those things. And so God's wisdom allows us. That's the other thing. When you're in corner 4 and you're having MVPs and you're close to God, it allows you then to go to those other 3 corners and help people.
Right.
Hey, I see a friend in isolation.
Right.
I'm going to go and help. Or I see a friend struggling over in the pseudo corner of, or bad connections. So it kind of goes full circle.
Yeah.
So you close this because this was your thing to begin with. Just talk about the home field advantage in Green Valley.
Well, we've used that illustration before because in sports, we know that there's actually a phenomenon that happens with home teams. They come to their home team. They've actually done studies that, by percentage, home teams usually win more often than they lose.
Right.
And what they found is that the reason being is that, there's some sort of a emotional reaction by the home team from the crowd cheering them on and the support that's given there in their own stadium, which they've dubbed home field advantage.
Home field advantage.
It's a term we all know.
Right.
And I love that illustration when we think of Green Valley and what God really created the church to be is to really be in a community, the home field advantage for people.
Right.
It's a great illustration.
The church should be a place where people come and can experience MVPs and experience God.
Right.
And that's the home field advantage.
Cheering journeys, valuing a soul, and it's like motivating people's character because that's really what happens when you come and you say, I am not alone in this.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like you said, that connection to God.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
I'll just close with this because it just made me think about, I was just talking to a gentleman who got his 1-year sobriety chip in Celebrate Recovery. And he said, I used to have friends that everything was the lowest common denominator. We never challenged one another to be better. It was always, and what he realized is they didn't really care about him. They just wanted him to compromise so that they would feel good about their compromise. He says, it's the first time in my life I am in small groups now where I know people care about me, but they care about me so much that they'll get in my face and they'll say, listen, you can be better than that. And I think that's
Says it all.
that's ultimately God's
Yeah.
plan. So
Yeah, that's great.
cool. Well, that was good.
Yeah.
That was a good talk. Daniel's asleep, so we're feeling everybody.
We're gonna have to wake him up after the show, but
But hopefully the cameras are still on. Thanks, John. That was a
You
good
bet.
topic.
Yeah,
Awesome,
thanks.
man. Thanks for being with us here on The Basics of Life, and we'll see you next time.